Thank you very much. Our consortium is quite a bit different, actually, and it's evolved from the time we started. We started off as a consortium aimed primarily at cardiac and cardiovascular devices, and over time have evolved and expanded it to all pediatric devices. The primary justification for the cardiac is that, aside from the obvious need, there's also a lot of development that's going on in the way of devices for the adult world, and it's really exploding in the adult world, yet we're not seeing it in the pediatric world. So the hope was to try to see if we could at least draft off of some of that activity and come up with some devices that were truly designed, not just adapted for kids. So I'm not going to go over much of the introduction, since you've heard the rationale for these. But our long-term objective was to come up with a mechanism to help device developers, pediatric device developers, at all stages, but primarily to focus in the last stage prior to commercialization, which is the clinical evaluation. So our consortium includes clinicians from Children's Hospital of Boston, where I'm on the staff, and also faculty members from Harvard Medical School, where I'm on the faculty, as well as individuals with expertise in the regulatory side, in the commercialization and business side, and then the engineering expertise. And you may get a chuckle as to where we got our engineering expertise, but initially it was actually Georgia Tech, rather than the technical school across the river.
Center of the world.
It changed. We're back in the Boston area, and we went to that technical school across the river, and they're very happy to work with us. So what we ended up doing was coming up with expertise in all of these components in an effort to both help the early process, where we get the biggest portion of the pyramid, which is a lot of great ideas that are often more science projects really than device development ideas, and then slowly build those into something that really has a viable chance of getting through both the regulatory side as well as the commercialization side. So our primary cores were that we had a clinical trials core, and here we combine the expertise of two big groups. One is the Pediatric Heart Network, which is an NIH-funded multi-center network for clinical trials. So they have conducted many of the very large pediatric cardiac trials involving multi-centered studies. So they already had the infrastructure, so in essence we were drafting off of them to be able to conduct clinical evaluation of devices now in multiple centers. And then New England Research Institute, which is a DCC. They're basically a data coordinating center for a lot of these NIH studies. And NERI has expertise in running clinical trials, regulatory trials, IDE trials, and so we're going to use them. The distribution of the Pediatric Heart Network for cardiac is nationwide. There are some core centers, 8 core centers, but there's a total of 18 now, peripheral sites distributed throughout the U.S. And so and these are all either children's hospitals or pediatric centers that have cardiovascular centers within them, and that have actually enrolled patients. In other words, they actually have experience in participating in these trials. And then NERI is the data coordinating center. Internally, within Children's, we use the resources of two groups. One is the Technology and Innovation Development Office, which is our own sort of intellectual property and commercialization side. The individual who's in charge of it has over 15 years experience. He was the director of the same type of office at Harvard, came to Children's, and really restructured the way our system works, and has been a tremendous help. And then the other is the innovation office that was started by Children's in recognition that they also needed to increase the level of activity for clinical innovation. And that actually changed us quite a bit, because our interaction with those two groups has broadened our activity, and I'll show you a couple of examples of how. A couple examples of projects. Some of these are good news, some of these are frustrations, and some of this you've already heard from me, the frustrations. This is one example. This is an absorbable annuloplasty ring for repairing valves, except it's made for children. Why would we care about an absorbable device? Well, kids grow. if we put in a fixed ring to reduce the size of a valve, which is the routine for adults, obviously we're going to create stenosis as the child grows. This is resorbable, goes away. It's been used in Europe for over 10 years now. There are clinical studies. Literally a couple of hundred kids have had these, have been reported. So one of the projects is to bring this into the U.S. This has been a very long road. We're to the stage now where we've got the clinical trial designed. We're ready for IDE approval. And this is where the process has slowed down. But we're still working on it. We've got the sites all set. We've got the clinical trial, which the FDA office has approved, the clinical part of it. The other component, which is the pre-clinical data, still has to be approved, and so that's where we're at right now. But great idea, a device that's already out there, and we know that it works, at least based on the European experience, bringing it to the U.S. There's no need for further development, at least in our opinion, but bringing it to the U.S. has been a little bit of a frustration. This is something that was a little bit easier in the sense that it went through a very different pathway. One of the problems that we have in diagnosing cardiac defects in children is something very simple, their heart rate. Heart rate in a newborn is 140, 150 beats per minute. If you and I were going at that rate, we'd be dropping dead. But if we're trying to diagnose a valve defect, for example, and that valve is flipping around at 140 or 150 times a minute, figuring out what the problem is can be very difficult. So what we worked with, and this was an idea that actually came out of one of our internal engineers, had a way of figuring out how to turn a standard ultrasound image that was acquired by a commercially available machine, in this case made by the company, Philips, take that data, reconstruct it, and increase the frame rate in it so that you could actually see literally this valve open and close in slow motion. Why is that important? Well, if you can take that typical image, which is going at video rate, 30 frames a second, except make it 500 frames a second, suddenly you can see enough detail so you can make an obvious diagnosis, which before wasn't so obvious. In fact, often it's very difficult to make. The advantage of this was, yes, it will have an impact in pediatrics, not much of an impact in adults because our heart rate's a lot slower and all the machines are designed for adults anyway. The advantage of this was that Philips could take this same technology and through a 510K process, get it into the market. So we've heard all the bad things about 510Ks. Here's an example of a very good thing about a 510K. And actually this has been taken up by Philips. They've licensed it. It's going to come out as a part of their product line within a year. The final thing that we've done, which is really a development of the Innovation Office at Children's, was the formation of this Innovators Forum, very much along the lines of what Michael has described, but the idea that individuals who have devices, ideas, innovations come, present their work, and get feedback, get assistance, and connect with other individuals with expertise. So this Innovators Forum was created about 2.5 years ago. Paula Abello, who's the organizer of it, is in the audience, and she's really responsible for managing this. And this has been highly successful. You can't read this slide, but this is just to give you an idea of the kinds of activity. We meet once a month. Individuals, and this could be regulatory expertise, could come and talk, or it could be an inventor that has a device, a gadget that they're working on, and they need some connection with an engineering team, or they need connections with a commercialization side. So the consortium has evolved. Now many of these examples have nothing to do with cardiac. They're neurosurgery or they're in other fields. We have really evolved to now all pediatric subspecialties. We have rediscovered MIT, and we've actually started to collaborate. Often in Boston, it's easier to collaborate with Atlanta than it is across the river. Not that that would ever happen anywhere else. But we are now re-engaging with that community for our current activity. And there are a number of centers that we are relying on to continue our work. Thank you very much.